Quint Penn stood on the edge of the medical bay's examination slab. His left hand clamped tightly around his right forearm, which bled in thick, rapid pulses. The fabric of his uniform was torn away, twisted into makeshift gauze, blood already soaking through it. His face was pale, jaw clenched, sweat rolling down his neck even though the room was cold. He was trying not to pass out. Across from him, the alien medic Tharn stood frozen, the scanner in his upper hands trembling. Tharn's eyes, all four of them, were fixed on the neat row of stitches running along Quint's thigh, a pink, puckered line holding together a wound that looked days old. "You did that yourself," Tharn said, his voice wavering. Quint's breathing was shallow. He nodded once. "I didn't have much choice," he muttered, then added, "Practice makes perfect." Tharn didn't move. The ship trembled slightly beneath them. Somewhere down the corridor, alarms howled and boots pounded, but in the silence of the medbay, time crawled. A soft hiss of sterilizers engaging filled the space, but Tharn still hadn't approached. "I need you to stop staring at my leg and fix my arm," Quint said through gritted teeth. "I'm losing too much blood." Tharn blinked rapidly and took an unsteady step forward. His lower hands reached out, then hesitated centimeters from the wound. "You stitched yourself. Without anesthesia. Wasn't any available. I was on Velen 4. Ship went down. Took me 2 days to find the beacon." Quint swayed and caught himself on the edge of the table. "Please. Focus." Tharn suddenly snapped out of it and turned, grabbing sterilizer packs and the dermal sealer. "You should be unconscious," he muttered, scanning the arm quickly. "The bone is not broken, but it has deep tissue damage. Tendons. Some are partially severed. This will require reconstruction. Whatever you need to do, just hurry." Quint didn't speak again as Tharn worked, his breath shallow and eyes unfocused. The pain was rising, but he bit it down. He'd been through worse. Probably. He barely remembered the transport ship exploding. 1 second, a smooth ride out of orbit. The next, a blinding flash, then fire, and then cold. He'd crawled out of the wreckage with the thigh gash and a dislocated shoulder. The stitches were done using a bent needle and fishing line he'd found in the emergency kit. The line had frayed halfway through and snapped once. He'd had to redo 3 of them. Now the arm, his dominant one. The pain was sharp clear, unlike the haze of the thigh wound. Tharn's hands were precise despite his earlier hesitation. The alien worked in silence, occasionally pausing to scan or apply sealant. He didn't ask questions. Not anymore. When it was done, Tharn stepped back and exhaled. "You'll need immobilization. No movement for at least 2 weeks. After that, gradual physical therapy." Quint gave a weak nod. "Thanks. You should have died down there," Tharn said. "You stitched your own leg. With fishing line." Quint didn't answer. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Recovery was slow. Quint remained in the medical bay for 3 days before he was stable enough to be moved to a crew cabin. His arm was wrapped in a cast-like brace, and his leg still throbbed if he stood too long. The ship, the U.S.S. Halberd, was docked at the Ashtari orbital outpost now, undergoing repairs. The explosion had been sabotage, likely from the same group that had shot down his transport. No one knew how many of them were still on board. His communicator beeped. "Penn," a voice said. "We need you in the hangar. There's a situation. I can't even hold a fork right now." "You don't need to. Just come." Quint groaned and got to his feet. He limped slightly, his balance off from compensating for the stitched leg. The brace on his arm made it hard to zip his jacket. He left it open. The hangar was chaos. 2 new ships had docked since the Halberd arrived. One belonged to the Hadron, a species known for their exquisite navigation and complete lack of patience. The other was an unregistered freighter, crewed by a mix of species but captained by someone who refused to give a name. At the center of the hangar, a body lay on the deck, an Ashtari worker, bleeding from the shoulder. A Hadron male stood towering nearby, gesturing wildly. I told him not to touch the panel, he shouted. He touched it. Got shocked. Quint pushed through the crowd. Tharn was already kneeling by the injured worker, his hands hovering again. Frozen. Quint cursed under his breath and knelt beside him. He's bleeding internally, Tharn said. The shock disrupted his blood flow. I need to then do it, Quint said. Tharn didn't move. Quint looked around. Anyone have a cutter? A tool was tossed his way. He caught it with his good hand, flipped it, and carefully sliced open the Ashtari's uniform at the shoulder. The burn was deep, skin blistered and cracked. Blood was seeping, not gushing. Internal damage, definitely. Tharn, you're the medic. You handle the inside. I'll manage the surface. Now. Tharn blinked and nodded. This time, he didn't hesitate. As the alien worked, Quint used a sealing agent to close the worst of the surface wounds, careful not to trap heat inside. Sweat rolled off his brow. His leg ached, and he could barely move his right hand, but he kept at it. When the Ashtari groaned and opened his eyes, Quint let out a sigh. Alive, he said. Tharn looked at him again, that same expression of disbelief on his face. You're not a medic, Tharn said. No. But I've been in enough situations where waiting for one meant someone died. Tharn helped him to his feet. Why do humans do that? Push through pain. Refuse rest. Fix themselves with fishing line. Quint laughed, but it was short. Because sometimes no one else will. Later that night, Tharn visited his cabin. You need rest, Tharn said. You're worsening your own recovery. I know, Quint said, not looking up from the datapad. But I need to log the incident. Tharn sat down. Your leg. It's healing well. But you shouldn't have done those stitches yourself. You could have lost the leg if it got infected. I know that too. Tharn leaned forward. I have studied over 30 species. All with different responses to trauma. But humans. You treat pain like something optional. Quint closed the datapad. It's not. But survival isn't optional either. Tharn was quiet a moment. Then, when I saw your stitches, I froze. I've worked on creatures with 7 stomachs and translucent skin. I've repaired a Trelvan artery using a needle the size of a grain of sand. But that row of stitches. It was different. Because I did it myself? Because you did it wrong. And it still worked. That made Quint chuckle. That's the story of humanity. Tharn stood. I'll see you tomorrow. For your checkup. As the door shut behind him, Quint lay back, arm propped on a pillow, leg elevated. His body hurt. Not just the stitched leg or the braced arm. Everything. But he was alive. And if tomorrow brought another crisis, he'd face it again. Not because he wanted to. Because somebody had to. The lights in the corridor flickered a dull amber, which meant either a minor systems recalibration or something was trying to vent atmosphere again. Given the Halberd's recent luck, Quint wasn't taking bets. He leaned against the wall outside the hydroponic bay, waiting for the lock to finish its decontamination cycle. The cast on his arm itched like hell, and he'd already tried to scratch under it with a chopstick, which made it worse. He shifted his weight, legs still stiff, but at least he could walk without dragging it now. The door finally slid open with a hiss, revealing a thick haze of humidity and the faint scent of something herbal and unfamiliar. Inside, the hydroponic bay looked more like a jungle than a food production unit. Fat-leaved vines hung from the ceiling rigs, and pale blue fruits the size of melons floated in nutrient gel columns. A tall figure with skin the color of rusted copper bent over a soil bed, whispering to a stalk that looked like it might whisper back. Dr. Oral, Quint said, stepping inside. They told me you had something urgent. The alien straightened slowly, revealing a face that seemed to be built entirely out of long, folded lines. Oral's eyes were narrow and almost translucent, like frosted glass. You're the human who stitched himself with recreational equipment. That's becoming a nickname, isn't it? Oral walked over, hands clasped. I requested your presence because you have a unique resistance profile. We've isolated a pathogen in the mycobed. It wiped out 200 seedlings overnight. A Giral technician got exposed. She's in quarantine. Quint raised an eyebrow. And you want me to, what, wade in and fight it with antibodies? You're the only one aboard who touched the same root system last week and didn't react. We think you carry a suppressive agent. Possibly an enzyme. Possibly just luck. Just luck describes a lot of my medical history. Oral didn't laugh. We need a blood sample. I need to synthesize a counteragent before the spores spread to the rest of the station's growth domes. Quint rolled up his sleeve with his good arm. You're sure it's not contagious to humans? We're not even sure it's real in the conventional sense. The spores don't replicate like ours. They fold in on themselves, like they're trying to disappear. Now I'm absolutely reassured. Oral extracted the sample with a long, needle-like tool that didn't actually pierce the skin, just hovered over it until a droplet of blood floated upward on its own. Thanks, Quint muttered. I miss needles. They didn't hum. Oral moved to a console, inserting the vial into an analyzer. Your species metabolizes aggression chemicals at a rate we've never documented. It's possible your immune system treats everything like it's trying to mug you. Quint leaned against a bench. That tracks. So what happens if the stuff spreads outside the hydroponics? Then I suggest you start stitching the entire ship. 2 hours later, Quint stood outside the quarantine chamber, watching through the clear barrier as the Giral technician shivered under a heat lamp. Her skin had taken on a faint shimmer, like tiny threads of silver were trying to emerge from her pores. Tharn stood beside him, arms folded, all 4 of them. His primary eyes were locked on the monitor, secondary ones blinking asynchronously. She's declining fast, Tharn said. The infection doesn't behave like a virus. It's rewriting her cellular lattice. Like it's trying to reprogram her into something else. Quint glanced at the screen. You ever seen anything like it? Not even remotely. And I've seen someone grow a second liver in the middle of their back. Oral entered, holding a vial of deep orange liquid. Synthesized from the human sample. No guarantees. It might help. It might accelerate the transformation. Quint didn't wait for consensus. He opened the chamber's access port and stepped in before anyone could argue. The air inside was heavy, dense with something that made his lungs itch. He knelt beside the Giral woman and gently touched her forehead. Hey, you still with me? Her eyes flickered open, pupils like drifting clouds. She didn't speak, but her hand twitched toward him. Quint injected the serum into the port at her neck. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her body arched, every muscle locking. The silver threads shimmered violently, then began to recede, like ink being pulled back into a pen. Her breathing steadied. Color returned to her cheeks. Quint exhaled and stood up. All yours, Doc. Back in the hallway, Tharn didn't speak for a full minute. You entered a quarantine zone with an unknown infection without protection based on a hunch and a vial of orange goo. Would you have done it? I would have run a 2-day simulation first. Quint rubbed his arm where the cast was starting to peel at the edges. She didn't have 2 days. Hours later, he sat in the mess hall with a bowl of something called zethroot stew. Tasted like rubber and regret. Across the table, a short, furred alien with antennae that twitched every few seconds was watching him intently. You're the one who went into the chamber, the creature said. Without a suit. Quint stirred the stew. That's me. You eat that and walk into biolabs. Is your species suicidal? We just don't like waiting around. The alien nodded slowly, then took out a small device and tapped a few times. I'm sending a report to the guild. They need to update the human entry. Right now it just says, unpredictable. I think we need a subcategory. Put me under stubborn with a medical license he made up. The next day, Oral called him back to hydroponics. Something you should see, the alien said, leading him to the far end of the bay where a set of floor panels had been removed. Underneath, the fungal root system had changed. The threads were no longer silver. They pulsed faintly with a reddish hue, like veins, and they had grown in a pattern, a spiral, perfectly symmetrical. That wasn't there before, Oral said quietly. It emerged overnight, after you entered the quarantine room. Quint crouched to look closer. It looks like writing. We think it is. We ran it through linguistic matrices. Closest match is a dialect from the border colonies. Fragmented, but the core phrase translates to, "We see you." Quint stood up slowly. Do you think it was intelligent? He asked. I think it still is. Later that evening, Quint sat in his cabin, staring at the faint red mark on his healed leg. The scar had faded into a clean line, but now it itched. Not like before. This was different. Like something beneath the skin wanted to be noticed. He rolled down his pant leg and turned off the lights. Something low in the ship groaned, metal shifting in the walls. This time, he didn't blame it on repairs. Quint leaned against the corridor wall, both arms hanging heavy at his sides. The cast was gone, replaced by a compression sleeve that wrapped from wrist to elbow. His leg barely twinged now. He still limped, but only when he was tired or the ship's gravity calibration hiccuped. It had been 5 days since the fungal infection had been neutralized. The hydroponic bay had been sealed and restructured with new containment fields. The Gerald technician was recovering in isolation, monitored around the clock. The fungal spiral beneath the floor had been removed, its pattern digitally archived and the root system destroyed after a long debate involving 5 departments and one very nervous diplomat. Quint hadn't gone back down there. Instead, he found himself staring at a broken pump valve in the maintenance subdeck, a wrench in his hand and sweat gathering along his hairline. A coolant line had ruptured and was leaking into the air filtration system. No technicians were available. The Halberd was down to a skeleton crew, with most personnel on board the Ashtari station filing diplomatic incident reports. "You are not certified to repair that," said a voice behind him. Quint didn't turn around. "Neither is anyone else who's conscious right now." The voice belonged to Yer, a Lintari engineer with translucent skin and a mouth that opened sideways. Yer's species had no vocal cords, but used a translator grafted to the side of their neck. The effect was unsettling, like a ventriloquist throwing their voice from inside a refrigerator. "You could trigger a system overload," Yer continued. "That conduit regulates temperature across 7 decks. Quint twisted the wrench, heard the hiss of pressure releasing. "Then I'd better not mess it up." Yer hovered closer, 3 legs barely making contact with the floor. "You should be resting. Your internal bio readings are still abnormal. You're overexerting. Noticed you didn't say I was wrong." Yer made a low vibration that might have been a sigh. "You are not wrong. But you are reckless. Comes free with the species. Recklessness is not a virtue. Depends on whether the ship explodes or not," Quint muttered, finally getting the valve loose. He pulled it free, revealing a buildup of frost and corrosion around the inner ring. "This thing hasn't been serviced in years." Yer scanned the valve with a handheld sensor. "It predates the last retrofit. Built for a different coolant composition. Not compatible with the Halberd's current systems. So we've been using a pipe that's been quietly poisoning itself." That is a crude but accurate description. Quint set the valve down and wiped his hands on his pant leg. "I'll fabricate a replacement. You are not on the duty roster. Neither is anyone who's still breathing and within 10 meters of this mess." Yer paused. "You do not treat authority as something that applies to you." Quint glanced up. "Is that a complaint or an observation?" Yer's translator buzzed once, then resumed. "I have not decided." The replacement valve took 40 minutes to print and another 15 to install. Yer remained the entire time, asking questions that veered from idle curiosity to what might legally qualify as a psychological evaluation. "You have been injured 3 times since docking," Yer noted as Quint tightened the last bolt. "You have not reported any of them through the formal medical chain." "I'm not good at paperwork. Your survival rate is anomalous. You are not enhanced. Your physiology is below the average of all known military personnel aboard. I eat a lot of carbs." Yer tapped something into the console. "Your sarcasm has no measurable utility." Quint stood up, wiped his hands again, and flashed Yer a grin. "That's never stopped me from using it." Yer turned away, muttering something in Lintari that didn't translate. 2 hours later, Quint found himself in the galley, staring at a tray containing something that looked like overcooked noodles and smelled like a wet sock. He took a bite. It tasted like neither. That was the closest thing to a compliment the food would get. He was alone until Tharn entered, holding a small data tablet and wearing the same expression he always wore when he wasn't entirely sure whether someone was about to die or win an award. "You've been flagged again," Tharn said, sitting opposite him. Quint didn't look up. "For what this time?" "Unauthorized engineering work. Also, your biometrics show elevated cortisol and irregular REM patterns." Years been monitoring me? They filed a concern. Said you were functioning outside acceptable safety margins. Quint dropped the fork. I've been functioning inside a ship that tried to kill me. Forgive me if my sleeping habits are a little off. Tharn narrowed his upper eyes. You are the only crew member with 3 separate medical incidents logged in 5 days. You're rounding down. I am not here to argue, Tharn said. I am here to inform you that you are being reassigned. Temporarily. Quint raised an eyebrow. To what? Rest. Supervised rest. On the surface habitat of the Ashtari station. 2 days. No duties. No tools. No injuries. I'll last an hour. That is the idea. He arrived at the surface facility just before dusk. A small dome nestled in the red gold sands of the Ashtari moon, it was designed for diplomatic retreats and stress decompression. Quint hated it instantly. The furniture was soft. The air was too clean. The silence pressed in like a weighted blanket. There was a garden outside the transparent dome wall, full of wind chimes made from native shells and vines that changed color when touched. He wandered the perimeter 3 times before sitting down. Then got up. Then sat again. And finally lay flat on the heated floor, staring at the ceiling and wondering whether boredom could cause a stroke. The door opened near midnight. He didn't look up. If you're here to tell me the ship exploded, just throw me a datapad. Ship is intact, Tharn said, stepping inside. You are not. Quint groaned. I'm fine. You are exhausted, chemically unbalanced, and emotionally repressed. I'm not repressed. You stitched your own leg and then refused follow-up care until your arm fell apart. Quint sat up. That's not repression. That's sequencing. Tharn knelt beside him. Do you know what the Ashtari say about humans? That we're unpredictable? That you are like plasma, capable of tremendous energy, but always looking for something to burn. Quint leaned back, eyes closed. We've got a lot of fuel. You need to stop before you burn yourself. He didn't answer. The wind outside shifted, chimes ringing softly. After a moment, Tharn stood. You will remain here until I say otherwise. That is final. Quint opened one eye. You're grounding me? I am putting out the fire. He stayed in the dome for 2 days. He read. He slept. He watered the color-changing vines. He didn't fix anything. It was the most difficult assignment he'd ever received. When he returned to the Halberd, the crew greeted him with a mixture of relief and mild apprehension. Yer handed him a list of systems needing inspection and refused to comment on whether it had been prepared before his return. The Giral technician passed him in the corridor and nodded, her skin fully recovered. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. And when Tharn checked his vitals, they were steady for the first time in weeks. You still don't make sense, Tharn said. I'll work on that. Don't. I prefer the mystery. Quint stood up, shoulder rolling easily now. Good. Because I'm not planning on changing. Of that, Tharn said, I have no doubt.